but now I'm standing there in my underwear in broad daylight. All the demonic voices stopped. I actually wound up in a straitjacket in a padded cell, touring hell.
Mike Smith, do you mind sharing your story with us?
To start off, I was a little kid. I was like 2, 3 years old, born in Aberdeen, and then the family moved to Sauk Center, Minnesota, the central part of the state. And that was a good time growing up with 4 siblings. I have one older brother, 3 sisters, and we would have a lot of fun together. My brother and I would always go out hunting gophers and just kind of doing our whole thing with his friends and stuff. So, we kind of had a tough childhood in one respect, is that my parents were always fighting about not having enough money. And that was something that was always kind of at the forefront of my life. My dad liked to drink quite a bit after work, and he was the manager of the J.C. Penney clothing store chain. I know all those stores have pretty much gone away now since Amazon has rolled in. But back in the day, he was a good provider. I'll say that about my dad. He had a lot on his plate to deal with. So when I was 12 years old, he was fired from his job at Penny's. And so we had a life savings, a little bit saved up to start our own clothing store, but we had to move in order to do it up to a little town, little ways outside of Fargo, about a half-hour drive down interstate called Barnesville, Minnesota. And I didn't have any friends in high school except one. So now I'm 12 years old in the start of high school in this new little town that was very depressing for the family. I think all of us kind of really struggled with that move over Christmas break in 76 and 77. Like I said, we moved over the holidays. So half a year at the Catholic school, we were raised Catholics. And then into high school years, John Hanson was the one friend I had. And John introduced me to smoking weed and drinking at age 12. So got off to an early start in my career with addiction, and it snowballed from there. 3 years into the move to the little town, when I was 15, my dad drops dead of a massive heart attack. And now the family is really craps creek with not having any way to support our our family. We're in the process of losing the business and the house, both to the bank that was financed up to the hill and back. And in the late 70s and early 80s, the interest rates to finance everything was around 14 to 15%, which is around what you pay for credit cards these days. So you can about imagine. But anyway, so my mom was always going home trying to run the clothing store on her own with no experience, because she never really worked in one before. She was a model in Sioux City, Iowa, growing up. And so she liked her fashion, and she liked high fashion, and she had no business sense. So we lost the business my senior year in high school. So I wound up trying college for a year in Fergus Falls, Minnesota. I flunked out of college in a year, so then I was out of options because I had my student loans that I had to pay and so on and so forth. So I joined the Air Force. My dad was Air Force. And to back up a step, right after my dad passed away was my first suicide attempt. And I should mention to you guys, I'm a 2-time suicide survivor. So, uh, you know, I just I just had such a hard time in life, even at a young age, growing up like that, and then having that happen to me in my adolescent years, and then, trying everything I could in life, and I just was not functioning. So I joined the military, like I said, and then there, the old routine started back right after basic and my schooling. I wound up stationed at Shepherd Air Force Base up in North Texas, and got in with a bunch of guys right away that like to get high. And that was during the Reagan administration, and they had their big war on drugs with Ronald and Nancy. So we would always see the signs when we'd go off base to smoke weed and come back on the base, and it would say, not in our Air Force, not in our, with the big X drug thing.
Do you mind diving into your first attempt when you were 15?
Yeah, that's fine. So what I did was, like I said, my mom would manage the store, try to. So I had all of my friends um, over at the house. And it was ironic because right across the street from our house was the principal's house, and his wife, the principal, was a stay-at-home daycare provider. So she was seeing all the cars and all the kids drinking beer, stumbling in and out of our house during school day, and I took a bunch of them in a car because I'd practiced this a few times on my own to take my own life, and I was telling them all, "Hey, guys, if somebody can give me a car, I'll show you the best time of your life." So they were like, "Yeah, let's do it." We were all liquored up, like I said, so they were all into it. And what I did was I took all of us on a ride by hitting the car to over 100 miles an hour into oncoming traffic from both ways, jump on a highway with blind spots in both directions. So had a car been coming, not only would I have killed myself, but killed up multiple people with me, and that's how down and low my mind was back then, that I didn't even care if that was the outcome. So that's a hell of a thing to confess to, but it's the truth. So as a result of that, I was hated in that town pretty much. My After that attempt, and people then started looking at me completely differently than before that. So after that attempt was college, then the Air Force. Now we're getting hard and heavy into the military, about 2.5 years into it. What happened, Austin, was there was this gentleman that came on base, and I got high with him one time. And he was coming on base one night to try and sell a pound of marijuana to an undercover cop. So he gets busted. And of course, what does he do? He names the names of everybody else to save his own rear end. And I was in what they called the Dirty Dozen. So they kicked me out. They sent me to San Antonio for treatment, which was 400 some odd miles away, because the most ironic thing about me and my adventures in the Air Force were I was not only smoking pot, but I was doing it with all the alcohol and drug counselors that were supposed to be telling everybody else, how to stay off of it. So they were total hypocrites. So anyway, after treatment for 6 weeks in San Antonio, they shipped me back to my base at Shepherd before they kicked me out, because then they could say, well, we at least attempted to treat this guy. So anyway, I'm up on the hospital grounds in the Texas heat where they sent me to embarrass me before they booted me. And I'm out there waxing ambulances. That's what the job was that they gave me. So I'm up there doing that. And here's the ironic part. And I look back on my life now that I'm 61, and I can see that this story was one of the first of many where God kind of was looking at my life and intervening all the way by sending this little old lady with a Bible tract walks up to me, and she asks me my name, and she starts talking, and she hands me this thing, and I start reading it. And I said, you know what? I really appreciate this gesture, but I cannot accept this. She goes, well, why not? And I said, because A, I'm not a Christian. B, I'm an alcoholic. C, I'm a drug addict. And D, I'm going to be kicked out of here any day now, and I have no idea where I'm going to go in life. And she goes, well, Michael, God loves sinners and all this other stuff. And it's just going in one ear and out the other, right? I'm just like, okay, whatever. But so I went from being kicked out a couple days after that to return to Moorhead and Fargo. So I landed in this little house in Moorhead, Minnesota with this buddy of mine that I had met my 1 year in college by the name of Don Matthews. And Donnie and I decided it would be a good idea to rent this house together so we could combine our rents, because it was a tough go for me. I had to work construction 7 days a week, 12-hour shifts. And I happened to have one day off, and during that day off, I encountered my dad, who had been dead for 8 years, telling me in broad daylight, sitting in my own house, Mike, everybody hates you, this, that, and the other thing. I'm gonna watch you go into your bedroom and take the shotgun and blow your effing head off, right? So I'm hearing all these voices, Austin, and I'm looking outside. I ran into the kitchen. I'm looking out, and all these cars are parking and stopping outside my house. And it was all the friends and stuff that I've known throughout my life getting out of the car saying, let's go watch this worthless piece of SHIT kill himself. And my dad was there too, like I said, and it was the most intense situation I'd ever been in. So, what happened was I laid down on the floor in the middle of my house, in the middle of the living room with the gun, and I was just about to blow my head off. And all of a sudden, the wind of some, I can't explain it other than to just say what happened. This wind just came and like pushed me out the front of my house. And I ran like 3.5 blocks away from the house because there was something evil in the house. I just wanted away from it. And then all of a sudden I came to, all the demonic voices stopped, and I'm kind of looking around, and now there's one or two cars driving by where reality was setting back into my head. But now I'm standing there in my underwear in broad daylight, and sweat just pouring off me. And they're looking at me like, okay, what is this? But anyway, I wound up going back to the house. The voices were continuing in my head, and I put the shotgun in the garage, and I just was laying there trying to fight it as much as I possibly could. And this friend of mine stopped by that would always come over to smoke weed with me. And this guy's name was Heath. So he comes in and he goes, Mike, what happened to you, man? You look like you saw a ghost or something, And I said, well, you know what, Heath, I don't want to talk about it. Cause in my head, man, if I shared that with somebody, what are they going to think of me was kind of where I was at. Right. So I said, Heath, cause I know he wanted to get high, and he starts to light one up. And I said, hey, Heath, listen, all I know right now, man, is I cannot get high. I feel like I need to get to church or something, was my comment, right? Because it was all that demonic voices. So to combat it, my only thought, and I was not really into church much as growing up a Catholic kid, so because I was an altar boy and all that stuff. But anyway, he goes, well, let me get something straight with you, Mike, right now, okay? I am not here to get preached to. If you don't want to get high, I'll just stop coming. And that was the last I ever saw Heath.
Tying that back to when you were being treated in the military, was there any connection between those 2?
Not those two, but there would be another connection later in my life, which we'll get to here in the interest of time. So now we're into 11 years after that event. And in the meantime, I'd got married, I had a kid, and my son was 4 years old when this next episode happened, and it happened in 1999. So that's exactly 11 years plus a few months later than that summer of '88 episode I was just discussing. So now this is when Y2K was all going on in 1999, right before Thanksgiving, to be exact, 2 days before Thanksgiving of '99. And at this time, I'd been promoted up through the city transit system. Okay. So I was on an infomercial one night flipping the channels, and it landed on Tony Robbins stuff. So I sent away for the personal power tapes from Tony Robbins, how to become, I was just wanting to become a better manager and better everything that I could be. So sent away for the tapes. They had this 30-day money back guarantee. So in Mike's bipolar head, he's thinking, okay, well, let's, get them all crammed in less than a month, and we'll ship them back and get my money back. So that's what I was doing and missing out on sleep. And as you well know, Austin, people that do have bipolar like myself, the one thing they really need more than anything is their medications and plenty of sleep. So that's how that kind of ties into what happened next. I was not sleeping. Instead, I was listening to the tapes, like I said. So now we're into 2 days exactly before Thanksgiving. I'm going from my house in West Fargo, driving back to my office, which is in downtown Fargo, and I'm starting to hear all these little voices again, okay? I was not hearing them for 11 years in between, and I was undiagnosed, I wanna mention, for those 11 years in between too. So, I was just going, you know, hard working hard and going to school and doing all this other stuff trying to function in life. So, anyway, so now we're into this event, and, I'm driving back, and right as I cross over Interstate 29 on Main Avenue, the voice said to me, "Mike, what do you really want out of life?" And I kept thinking to myself, "Well, man, more money would be great, or more time, or more this." And it was like, "No, that's not it, man. What do you really want out of life?" So I pull over to the side of the road and thought about it for a second. I guess I said to myself, "Well, you know what?" And it was like I was talking to God directly. I said, "I guess I just want acceptance. That's all I want." I think that's all anybody wants is acceptance. And so the voice said to me, "Mike, I do accept you, and I love you, and I died for you. So I love you unconditionally. Now go out and share that message with the world." Right? That was what was going on in my head. So now I get out of my car because I thought, "Well, that means I gotta get out and share the message right now," So I get out and I start pounding on the hoods of cars, and I'm stopping traffic on Main Avenue, rush hour, right? And I'm thinking, well, I was just thinking that was what I was supposed to do, but all of a sudden this cop shows up, pulls me out of traffic, and, he goes, "What's going on, Mike?" Because I gave him my name, showed him my ID, and he goes, "How you doing?" He could tell I wasn't on anything, no alcohol, no drugs, nothing. And he starts asking me a few questions like, "Who do I know in town?" And the one person I named first was his boss, because my little sister's married to him, the chief of police. So he goes, "Oh, Keith, you know Keith. Okay. How about anybody else in town? Who else do you know?" So I gave him my wife's name, and she runs a very big nonprofit in town here that I'm not going to mention on air, but she's a social worker. So gave him her name as well. So he goes, "Well, I'll tell you what, Mike, let's get you to the hospital to get you examined, to just get you in a safe place and see what the doctors can do for you." So that was my first introduction into total mania. I went the voices went from being very angelic to very demonic when I got to the hospital, just like in '88. So now we're again 11 years apart. But this time, instead of, taking my own life with a shotgun, this time I actually wound up in a straitjacket in a padded cell, touring hell for 3 straight days, or what it would be like to be in hell. My wife said that when that morning rolled around, and because I went home the next day before they put me in the cell, I wanted out, so they released me against doctor's orders, but that night when I went home before, I was pacing the floor and I couldn't sleep, so wound up screaming out in torment the next morning, and that's how I ended up in the straitjacket. She said she could see my eyes roll back in my head, and it was just total torment. I was shaking uncontrollably, and, she like I said, she calls the ambulance, so I wa my the worst part about it was my 4-year-old son and wife witnessed this, you know, and, it was hard on myself as well, as you can imagine. It was very hard because it scarred me for the rest of my life, and, I would not wish that episode on anybody, whether they're a total, you know, not such a pleasant person, but I wouldn't wish it on anybody because it was that bad. I'll share one last thing about that episode, being in that straitjacket and in that place. Uh, it's a place of remembrance. I remembered all the people I'd hurt that, were lashing out when I was in there in a very demonic, like, funnel and tongues and all this crap rolling around me and heat and all this. And so, coming out of it, about 2, 3 days later, there was this nurse. She said, "Mike, I wanna share something with you, and that is that when you were coming out of there and you were finally starting to kinda come to a little bit, your eyes were as big as saucers because you look like a cornered, scared animal." And that was her comment. So that was Nurse Amy, and that stuck with me. They had me in therapy for quite a few weeks after that. I lost my job as a city transit manager because I could not function. I wound up having to do a lot of bad jobs as a result, and, one of those jobs led me to my second suicide attempt, and that was I got stuck being a taxi cab driver. That was the only job I could find, driving the drunks around at night, and they would tease me and make fun of me and say, "Well, what's the matter, loser? You can't find a real job," and stuff like that. So I went home that night, and this is the second suicide attempt, that, I took an electrical cord in the basement of our house and started stringing myself up in the rafters, and, as you can imagine, it's pretty painful. I, so I'm doing that, and I'm just about to kick the stool out, and there's this still, quiet voice that said, "Mike, your life still has a purpose." And I just th that stopped me. So, now we're a two-time suicide survivor, and having that all going on, I had to go through several different treatment programs. I had to go through 2 different homeless shelters, military homeless shelters, after all this had happened. This was in 2019 now, so now we're forwarding ahead even another 22 years later, struggling with all this, and, the one thing I really wanna stress with everybody is that not only did I go through all that and what I was just sharing with you, but they also placed civil commitments on me in 2 states, both in North Dakota and Minnesota, to where I lost my freedoms for 6 months in each state when I tried to escape from one to the other. Then they put me in 2 jail cells, 2 different jail, in 2 different cities. They put me in finally in a state institution here in Jamestown, North Dakota. They institutionalized me for 6 straight weeks. And what would happen then is that they would take me in shackles every week in the back of a paddy wagon and drive me to Fargo from the state hospital, 100 miles riding in the back of those things each trip, right? You can about imagine how uncomfortable that would be. And I got in front of each judge 5 different times, and every time, I would just break down and start crying thinking, "Why am I even here? I didn't kill anybody. I didn't steal from anybody. It was all because of my mental health issues." Right? So, look at my life and look at the track record of my life and how it all comes full circle was after they finally the 6th week from Jamestown, they they said, "Well, Mike can go live in a homeless shelter," so that was my second one, in Fargo. We'll put him back in Fargo in a homeless shelter. So now there's veterans in there upstairs, and then there's criminals downstairs, people transitioning out of jail, and that was where the facility I was in. It was called Project Heart in Fargo, which no longer exists, and this is in 2019. So this is only 6 years ago, so it's very recent. But it leads you to the road of redemption, and that's what I like to share with people is that, um, when I was released, what happened to get me out of the homeless shelter was I was just in my room one day doing nothing as always. This lady that worked at Project Heart came upstairs and said, "Mike, you have some mail today." And the mail was 2 big service checks from the military with 100% back pay from all those years of going through all those trials. So I packed up all my crap and I got out of there as quick as I could, left a lot of my clothes behind, as you can imagine, went out and bought myself a new twin home, and the rest is history.
Are you able to elaborate a little bit on those trials that you were talking about?
Yeah, what they would do, they would take me, like I said, from Jamestown, but the thing about it I never understood was, why weren't my medications balanced when that's what they were trying to do the entire time? You know, it I that's where the frustration and the breakdown in the system was, and I still am an advocate today for more awareness of what's going on with people that have gone through similar situations. And all of my custom shirts, it says 22 veterans per day. That's the amount of suicides that are taking place in the country each day with just our veterans. Then you throw in the fentanyl and all the rest, as anybody in the healthcare system that works in there can tell you, that it's like it is so out of control, and how the two go hand in hand, the addiction with the mental health issues. And so that's what I'm an advocate for these days, and really stress and push, is to say, those people shouldn't be in chains and having to endure everything Mike had to go through. It's just that I happen to have suffered that much, but it gives me a very empathetic heart to people that have that same thing going on. I have a friend of mine, a good friend, for many years, that right now his daughter is in jail as we speak, going down that exact same road that I am. And, it's so prevalent in today's society, in America especially, where that's their answer, is to put them in jail if they can't, or institutionalize them if they don't know what else to do with them.
So that was a pretty horrible experience, and you don't think that there was any help there for you?
No, I don't think there was any help there for me. The only thing that helped me was the back pay from those checks. Everybody started looking at me differently, which is very unfair because I'm the same person, you know, and money shouldn't have to factor into it at all. Um, you can tell that I'm authentic and raw. I started getting choked up there a little while ago, and it's like that's how real that pain still is all these years later. I there's certain points of it that I can get through okay, and then there's other points of it I can't get through okay, because, why did Mike have to endure all that? Going back to the cab driving days, or the padded cell, or the institution, or you name it, what a lonely ride. And, I'll share one last thing with you guys, and that is that this might be getting off base a little bit, but it's worth talking about. I remembered watching this documentary on Prince after he died, and his best friend spoke up. And Prince, of course, was hooked on fentanyl, as we all know, before he died. And anyway, his best friend said, I bet you anything that if Prince would have just had a normal life, quote unquote, worked in a factory, had a couple kids, he would have died a lot more happy man, because he looked like the loneliest man on the planet. And I can relate to that comment, because that's the same way I feel. I just, wanna help others. That's why I'm here. That's why I do the volunteer work I do these days. That's why I'm into all the jail chaplain events and everything else in Fargo, to get my message out there to the biggest and best of my ability, and say, if I can reach one person with my message, and I wanted to get that out there as we're taping, to say, reach out to Mike at his personal email, which is mike@theguttergospel.com. If you feel like no other hope or help is available to you and no one understands you, I answer those emails. First thing I do every morning. Second thing I do is read out of the Life Recovery Bible, and that starts my day on the right track.
Do you think that you still battle this every day, or have you been a lot better off since finding, I guess, redemption?
I am a lot better off these days than I was years ago, because now my meds are balanced, and I'm involved in the community. I'm involved in charitable giving, like I mentioned briefly, and everything else kind of balances my life to where I don't have to be over medicated, or under medicated, or misunderstood, or put in prison, or all those other things. So that's the road to redemption. The reason I named that the gutter gospel, the road to redemption, is because the road to redemption isn't perfect. It still has bumps in the road, just like everybody else in life does. I have been clean for 6 years, but that's not the point. The point is that to judge people that way is very unfair, because if you're clean 2 a day, in today's society, that's a first step to the rest of your life. I mean, it's hard enough to face life with everything that's going on, watching the news or anything else, and it's like, man, everything's caving in around us. So you gotta find that balance in your life, and I found it through the church and the small men's groups and get involved with volunteering at nonprofit a nonprofit I believe in very strongly.
And when you say you've been clean, do you mind specifically what you're referring to?
Yeah, for I was an alcoholic for all those years. I dropped the marijuana many years ago, but my drug of choice was always drinking, and, what happened there, I shared with you before we started to tape about my right deltoid. That was the drinking accident that put all my drinking to an end. I had a bad fall where I tore out my right deltoid, and I always tell people, "I can't shake your hand right-handed anymore, but if you look at my message, it's like, here's the impact right here on my shoulder, then look at right here on my temple. Had I missed it or went, one direction the other way, I wouldn't be here to tell my story." So that's the message of the gutter gospel. No one's perfect. So Mike's the last guy on the earth to probably preach to anybody, but at least I think people can tell it's raw and it's authentic and it's very genuine. So I got involved in the jail chaplain ministry in Fargo very heavily. I'm in men's groups every day of the week. I got my medications balanced finally, and on and on and on. And the ironic part about the whole thing, Austin, I wanted to share with you guys is that I just got my autobiography published at the first of the year. And for 30 years, I was always journaling for some reason when I was going through all those trials. And that's what's in the book that you can find at the bottom of the homepage on my website, theguttergospel.com. I put it up there for $7.99 a month. I'm sorry, a one-time payment of $7.99. And then I just wanted to get that out there that all the journaling and everything I just shared with you, you can read about. It took me 30 years of journaling and all those struggles in my life to finally get it all compiled just this year. So if you want to read all about it, it's there. I got the sample chapters if you want to read those for free on my site as well. So you guys feel compelled, donate to the Seeds of Hope Food Pantry up on the donate tab. That's a organization I believe in very highly that feeds the poor people here in town. They're a great ministry. We can give you Blair and Jody's contact information if you want to reach them directly out in Dilworth. So they're happy to take donations or volunteers or anything if you're in the Fargo area, which I don't know who this show reaches, but if you are, get a hold of Mike and we'll go out for a cup of coffee or something and get to know each other.